Recently, Wizards of the Coast released a huge update to the Artificer class, and it seems that we're rapidly approaching an official release of the class. I haven't done one of these Unearthed Arcana Analysed videos in a while, but I felt now would be an appropriate time to pick them back up, as I did a rather thorough analysis of the last version of the Artificer. This new iteration of the Artificer has changed quite a bit from the last version, and I'm glad to be able to say that a lot of the things I had feedback on last time have been addressed in this version. Just like last time, I've added a link to the Unearthed Arcana article below, if you want to give it a look yourself or read along as I talk about it. Now, my talking points here will be heavily influenced by the previous version of the Artificer. This is very much a comparison, so if you don't remember how the class used to work, then I'll also add a link to my old Artificer video in the description below. Just pop on over and watch that one, and you should be able to follow along here fairly easily. First, let's talk about the lore. The article makes it very clear that the class is heavily rooted within the Eberron setting, which gives me brief hope, however unlikely, that they would release an actual physical copy of the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron and include this class in it. They also describe in a sidebar how artificers work in other worlds where they can be found. I like this approach, although the Artificer was originally created before the creation of Eberron. Eberron popularized the Artificer and turned it into a separate class, and it's really there that the class found its place. Taking this approach also lets them be a lot more direct and specific with the lore, instead of speaking in general terms. The Artificer is pretty unique and a specialized class, so it makes more sense to handle them this way. Those of you who watched my old Artificer video might remember that I was skeptical towards making the Artificer a base class available in all settings. And it seems like, thankfully, Wizards won't be going that route. Instead, opting for something similar to how we did with the expanded player options in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. There, they also presented the options with a specific setting in mind, but added suggestions for how they could work within other settings. Now, let's take a look at the actual rules and what they changed, and how this new Artificer compares to the old one. Nothing's changed in the hit point section, but when it comes to proficiencies, we do actually have several changes, some of which I'm quite excited for. Artificers now get proficiency with shields in addition to their medium armors, which I find interesting. More importantly, however, they get more weapon proficiencies, specifically crossbow proficiencies. The old Artificer was very restricted in what weapons they could wield, being limited to just simple weapons. The revised version gets both hand crossbows and heavy crossbows. I expressed concern with the old Artificer that there was no point for them to ever use crossbows, and for me, the crossbow is the archetypical weapon for the Artificer, so I'm glad that they embraced that. They also added in firearms as a sidebar, which is just a change I love. Guns should not be a standard in D&D. They should be an optional rule. And I'm saying this as someone who loves two D&D settings that potentially feature quite a lot of firearms, namely Spelljammer and Ravenloft. And they even refer to the gun rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which are perfectly fine rules for firearms that a lot of people simply ignore or forget. Now, if your DM allows this sidebar, it also grants the Artificer proficiency with firearms. This is a much better way to handle Artificers and firearms than what they did in the previous version. And the addition of this sidebar might have led some of you to already guess that they eliminated the gunsmith specialization, and yes, they did. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're talking proficiencies here, so let's move on to tools. Artificers still get Thieves' Tools and 2 other tools from the start, but now one of these is fixed to Tinker's Tools, while the other one is of your choice. I'm okay with that. An Artificer who doesn't tinker isn't really much of an Artificer in my book, but I can see some people hoping to play more of a straight Alchemist that might find that change annoying. When it comes to skills, they made one change that I'm thrilled about. They dropped Deception and Religion from a skills list. Instead, they added Perception. Now, it might not be obvious why this is such a huge change, or why it makes me so happy. Well, one of the roles of the Artificer is to be the Trap Finder and Disabler. Generally the job for the rogue, but it's a niche that the Artificer is intended to fit as well. But without Perception, they might have been great at disabling traps, but the poor Artificer was just the worst at actually finding the traps, so they couldn't really do the job justice. Now they can. Next we have equipment. I usually don't care much about starting gear, but they've made a small improvement here by removing the weird option of starting with either 2 specific simple weapons or 2 simple weapons of your choice. Now you just get to pick 2 simple weapons. Otherwise it's pretty much all the same. One thing they did add that I appreciate, however, is starting money. Generally, I don't allow my players to choose their starting gear from backgrounds and classes. I almost exclusively make my players roll for how much cash they have, and then have them buy their gear. Now, there are two main reasons I do this. First, I find that the starting gear is often quite restrictive, and doesn't allow for some of the more creative ways to build a character. Secondly, I find that if people are allowed to the starting gear from backgrounds, many will try to choose a background that gives them as much swag as possible. I want my players to choose a background that fits with the character they're trying to build, and that leads to interesting stories and adventures. Not one they just picked because it gave them extra wealth. Anyway, that's a massive sidetrack there, but that's why adding the option to roll for starting wealth is important to me. Now let's move on to class features. Gone is the class feature that allowed the Artificers to identify and detect magic items. In fact, spellcasting has been revamped overall with the Artificer, but we'll get onto that next. Instead, at level 1, Artificers now get Magical Tinkering, which is a cute little ability which actually functions a lot like a prestidigitation in magical item form. You basically imbue non-magical items with a magical effect cantrip-like effect, and you can have a number of these items imbued at one time equal to your intelligence modifier. Now, some of these effects can be really useful, others maybe less so. They all last indefinitely, however, which definitely boosts their value. The first of these allows you to create a weak light effect. Might not sound useful, but even if a light only reaches 10 feet, it can be a lifesaver. I've known countless human characters who could have used it at one point or another in their careers. The second effect basically turns any item into a dictaphone. When you create the effect, you record a message, up to 6 seconds long, then any creature can tap the item, and the message is played. It's useful for sending secret missives, taking quick notes, or just messing with people. The third effect you can create bestows an item with a continuous sound effect or smell. The effect only reaches 10 feet, but can still be used as a distraction, to create stink bombs or just to spice up your life. Going to a fancy party? Give your jacket a gentle rose scent. Having trouble sleeping? Make your bedside table play whale sounds or ocean waves. The last effect available makes a static visual effect appear on the surface of an item. It can be up to 25 words, or any sort of picture or motive really. I can see this being useful to leave behind obvious notes or messages, or making your way in a dungeon, and you can also use it to decorate your armor or gear. So let's talk about the other trait your Artificer starts out with at level 1, spellcasting. Artificers still use Intelligence as their spellcasting ability, which is good, it fits the class, and we could use some more variation amongst these spellcasting abilities. Now they've done something quite interesting with the Artificer. An Artificer is bound to using foci for their spellcasting, and they normally don't use the same foci as other arcane spellcasters do. Instead, they have to either use their tools or an item they've imbued with magic, and more on that later. When an Artificer casts his spells, he's actually creating or using some kind of magical device. So an Alchemist might be throwing acid vials when using Acid Splash, or drinking a healing potion when he uses Cure Wounds himself. When an Artificer is preparing their spells, they're actually crafting and preparing gadgets or components that they use to cast their magic. Artificers can switch out their spells during a long rest. Effectively, they are breaking down the items they use to cast their spells and salvaging them to build new devices. This takes time, however, a minimum number of minutes equal to the level of a spell they wish to craft. This spellcasting system is all about the theme and flair, and it's meant to be a bit abstract. And it's made very clear that you receive no additional benefit or disadvantages from casting your spells this way. I definitely know some players who would attempt to abuse the system, trying to keep track of different components they have inside of their gadgets and using them outside of spellcasting, for instance, but overall I still enjoy the Artificer's spellcasting. It captures the feeling of being an Artificer very well, while not overly complicating the way spells in D&D already work. Another unique thing about the Artificer magic is that when they level, they can actually switch out their cantrips as well. Artificer magic is really all about versatility. You might have a rather small amount of spells to choose from, but you can always make sure you have the right spells for the right situation. Artificer spellcasting runs between 1st and 5th level spells, and unlike the previous versions, you start with spells at level 1. They use their own spell list, and they even get a completely new spell, Arcane Weapon, that infuses a weapon they're holding with different damage types. But the Artificer is still unfortunately lacking any spells from Sanaphars, which is a bit of a shame. The next trait the Artificer receives at level 2 is Infuse Item. During a long rest, you touch a magical item and infuse it with magic, effectively turning the item into a specific magical item. You can learn a set number of infusions, and you can only have that many infusions total at a time. If you die, the magic eventually fades from the item, but otherwise it lasts as long as you do. Some of the infusions are unique effects, while others copy the effects of existing magical items. This is a great change. Previously, the Artificers would receive specific magical items when leveling up, but if those items were lost or destroyed, that would basically mean that your level was largely wasted. This way, you will still allow for an Artificer to be someone who crafts and wields a number of different magical items, but they're tied to the character and won't be permanently lost, which puts them more in line with other classes in their progression. At level 3, the Artificer gets expertise with their tools. They used to get this as level 2, but you're actually likely to have more tool proficiencies with this version, and it's no longer limited to just the tools you gain from a class. Instead, with any tools you're proficient with, you double your proficiency. This means Artificers would generally be the best crafters in the group, which kinda makes sense. At 5th level, the Artificer gains the Arcane Armament trait, which gives the Artificer an extra attack, but only if they're wielding a magical item. This shouldn't really be a problem unless you get disarmed, thanks to spell infusions. Then, at 10th level, you gain the ability to switch out your cantrips during a short or long rest, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And at 18th level, you can store spells and items for later casting. This used to be a level 4 ability, so I find it quite interesting that it's been moved up so far in the class progression. It's also been made a little bit more powerful, as it doesn't fade over time, and now you get multiple uses out of a stored spell before it's spent. Up to double your intelligence modifier times, which, let's face it, with a level 18 Artificer is going to be maxed out, so you can cast a stored spell 10 times. The last ability granted to all Artificers allows them to attune up to 6 different magical items at one time, and they gain a +1 to their saving throws for each item they attune to. Pretty much the same as before, and it's powerful, but what level 20 ability isn't? Now, let's talk specializations. The Artificer has 2 of them, and there's been a lot of changes here from the last time we saw the class. We still have the Alchemist, although it's been massively reworked, and the Gunsmith has been completely scrapped. Instead, we get the Artillerist. Overall, both specializations feel a lot more balanced and interesting than the old ones were. Both have lost their overpowered attack abilities, and they're more focused on capturing the feeling of a particular type of Artificer. An interesting thing I noticed is that the old Artificer was a bit of a pet class, with the construct you received. The new Artificer is still a pet class, but your pet has been moved into your specialization, so they're more in line with the type of Artificer you're looking to play. Not everyone is going to like that the Artificer is a pet class, but then again, every class doesn't have to appeal to every person. And with how the class is designed now, you could see specializations coming along later that did not include any pets, for those who wish to play without them. All Artificer specialities seem to be designed to receive extra tool proficiencies, and to have decreased costs and times on crafting certain items. I like this addition, as the core of the Artificer fantasy is really to be a master crafter after all. Let's start talking about the Alchemist. From the start they receive training in Alchemist supplies and the Herbalism kit. You also gain a set of each for free, that you've cobbled together in your spare time. When you brew a potion, they're also about half cost and take only a quarter of the time, meaning you could throw together 4 healing potions in a day for about 50 gold. Not a bad haul. Artificers get bonus memorized spells from their specializations, much like a cleric. These are always prepared and don't count towards your normal maximum. As you might imagine, the Alchemist gains spells that simulate alchemical processes, such as poison and acid attack spells, and purification of food and water. You also get your homunculus when you pick a specialization at level 3. This construct body is really the main feature of his specialization. The homunculus scales with you as you level up, gaining 5 hit points every Artificer level you have, and its abilities increase in strength with your proficiency. You can also revive it within an hour of its death with the help of your Alchemist tools if it's killed, or completely create a new one during a long rest if need be. You can also heal your little buddy with the Mending cantrip. Overall, this is a much better way to handle a pet than how they were handled with the Beastmaster Ranger. It feels like the Artificer can actually use their pets, without having to fear to lose them to every stray fireball. Using your bonus action, you can command your homunculus, allowing it to attack or bestow a salve on a friendly target that gives them a buff. Now these range from limited flight to advantage on ability checks to temporary HP. Overall, the Homunculus is a very useful companion, and it's nice to see that the Artificer has them back in their kit. At 6th level, the Artificer gains a bonus to their acid and poison damage and the healing they do, equal to their intelligence modifier, and they also gain the ability to cast lesser restoration a number of times for every day for free. Then at 14th level, you can cast greater restoration as well for free, once per day. And you gain resistance to acid and poison damage as well, as immunity to the poison condition. The Alchemist has a heavy focus on acid and poison damage, and on restorative magic, and definitely captures a feel of that potion-slinging Alchemist. And then you have the other specialization, the Artillerist. This replaces the incredibly overpowered and, in my opinion, terrible Gunsmith specialization that the Artificer had in the previous iteration. Instead, we get an Artificer that focuses on raining down massive damage with attack spells and who summons turrets that can be both offensive and defensive. They gain proficiency with smith tools and woodcarving tools, which makes a lot of sense for someone who focuses on building war machines. And just like the Alchemist, they gain a set for free when they pick the specialization. They also gain proficiency in rods, staffs and wands, allowing them to be a bit more like a classical wizard, although of the implement slinging kind, and their discounted crafting is applied in making wands. I'm a little bit less thrilled about that part. Making cheap wands is great, and they get an additional ability that later ties into wands as well, but I feel like the Artillerist is more of a siege engineer and perhaps should have had a easier time crafting siege weapons and fortifications, although that is far less practical or interesting to most players. Partially I feel that way because it feels like they've merged the Artillerist with the idea of a wandslinger, who I see more as a duelist sporting wands for every occasion, and I'd hope to see them as their own Artificer specialization. So basically I would have personally preferred an Artificer archetype based entirely around wands, and that this one was more focused on siege engines and battles, but in the end it's just a matter of personal taste. Like I mentioned earlier, the Artillerist is all about bringing the boom, and their spells reflect that. They get several heavily damage spells, such as Fireball, but also some defensive ones, like Shield. Their unique spells definitely set them up as being more combat-oriented than your average Alchemist. Right out of the gate, you can summon turrets as Artillerist. These work a little bit like pets or companions, but unlike the Alchemist's homunculus, the turrets aren't living creatures. They're more like remote-controlled robots with guns. They can slowly move around and fire at enemies, but you need to use your bonus action to direct them, although you can be up to 60 feet away. At level 3 you have a single turret, although it can be fairly dangerous and tough with hit points equal to 5 times your level and an AC of 18. You can also order them to detonate, destroying them and hopefully the enemy along with them. There are 3 basic variants presented: a flamethrower turret that does damage in a 15-foot cone, a force ballista that fires up to 120 feet and can knock your enemies off walls, and finally a defensive variant that grants temporary hit points. At level 6, the Artillerist gains the before-mentioned wand feature. It allows an Artificer to imbue cantrips into wands they craft. These wands work just for you, and you can create one each long rest, although its magic will fade away until the next long rest you take. You also gain a bonus equal to your intelligence to the damage of a cantrip you can cast through your wand. And at level 14 you can imbue a wand with an additional spell. It's an interesting talent, definitely fits well into Eberron, but I would have preferred to see an ability that did something along the lines of increasing the Artillerist's damage potential with heavy crossbows or such. It just feels more thematic. Finally, the Artillerist also gains the ability at level 14 to protect themselves and their allies with the help of their turrets. At that point, your turrets project a magical force field around them to grant cover to you and your allies, and you can also summon a second turret, which you can control simultaneously with your first one. This not only helps you to scale up your damage as you level up, but it also makes the Artillerist more versatile. And versatility is all what the Artificer really is about. Overall, I like the new Artificer. It feels much better than the previous version. To some extent, it feels like they took my list of complaints and just went down the line, fixing them one by one. This new version, it fits the fantasy of playing a Master Crafter so much better. It feels balanced, but still has a lot of interesting things going for it. I've allowed Artificers for a while now in my own groups, although no one's really been interested, but this version of the Artificer I'm actually excited to see in action, both as a player and a DM. And I know my players feel the same way. Now, let's just cross our fingers and hope they manage to save the Mystic as well. Well, that's it for this time. If you enjoyed this little look at the Artificer, then why not give this video a like? And if you want to support the channel, please share this video with your friends or on social media. It really helps out a lot, and you can also check out my DM's Guild page or follow me on Tumblr or Twitter. I'll add links to all of that in the description below. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers.